Camden Town has long been the counterculture heart of London. Punks, rockers, mods and goths mixing side by side and collectively snubbing their noses at the humdrum herd of normal society. 100 different cliques of alternative thought and style mingled among the throngs of tourists drinking in this little piece of British colour, patterned around the bustle of rock music stores, blaring guitar-heavy riffs, and quirky fashion outlets retailing metal, lace, and leather in every shade of black. A mecca of the anti-establishment. Within the twists and turns of Camden's markets, sewn together through alleys and cobblestoned passageways, there exist certain unique gems of the unusual, not to be found anywhere else. Backstreet bookshops and hidden flea markets selling the rare, the strange, and the lost. Though many would not suspect, these quirky bazaars are in fact deeper and more mysterious than they appear. Should one take the right turn, on the right day, at the right time, you may find yourself amid stalls and shops rarely seen, brokers in the most exceptional of wares. Tina was a regular in Camden. It was one of her favourite places in the whole world. She knew the pubs, the clubs, and was on friendly terms with many of the different shop and stall holders. She knew the place inside and out. This is why she was so surprised when she found herself in an unfamiliar place, having taken the right turn, on the right day, at the right time. She had been browsing through the stables, a sprawling marketplace of many twists and turns, built into the site of Camden's old stable area. Statues of horses, finely sculpted in dark bronze, had been erected here and there, along with bronzed men and women in Victorian street clothes, attesting to the history of the location. Now the stables was a place of vivid colours and rich scents. Stalls sold brilliant arrays of clothing, furniture, posters and ornaments, while all manner of booths offered foods from across the world: Chinese, Thai, Indian, Spanish, Turkish and more. A feast for the senses, as every step became a rich tapestry of spices and aromas, music and sound, stunning colours, and vibrant design. It was her hope that she'd be able to get something special to wear, something sexy. She had a plan for tonight, a special treat for Mark. He'd been working so hard lately, putting in extra hours while she looked for a new job, and then fixing up their new house on the weekend too. So she wanted to surprise him when he came home from work. She'd run him a nice bath so he could unwind, cook his favourite meal for him, and then, after they'd eaten, there'd be a final sexy treat to round off the evening. What better way to spend a Friday night? Phase 1 was easy enough, and she'd already picked up some wine for Phase 2. Now she was looking for some wicked little touches to make Phase 3 stand out. She was going to dress up for him. Some new steamy underwear, but what else she was unsure. Perhaps leather or rubber. She could do the whole dominatrix thing, even get a whip or a riding crop, some handcuffs, a blindfold. He might like that. Maybe. They'd certainly toyed with it before, but never really gone all in for it. Actually, she thought, maybe that's something for another time, something to talk about first, rather than diving in without really knowing where our limits are with such things. So, she decided to go with something a bit more certain to raise his temperature. He liked a bit of dressing up in the bedroom, naughty nurse, police uniform, that kind of thing. Something down those lines might be better. As she eyed a long, slinky black velvet dress, an idea came to her. A sexy witch. That would be perfect. He loves that kind of thing, a real fan of horror and spooky stuff, she thought. Well, they both were. They were famed among their friends for their epic Halloween parties. Yes, she thought, picking up the dress from the rail, that would be something they could both enjoy. She held the dress up against her body and looked in the full-length mirror behind her. She could see that the fit was right, without even having to try it on. Checking the tag, the price was good too, just £25. Granted, the quality wasn't amazing, but there was a chance it would only get torn off her anyway, so that was fine. After all, it was for dressing up at home, not going out in. So all that really mattered was that it looked the part, and it definitely did. She'd be the sexiest of sexy witches. Paying for the dress, she moved on through the market, looking for some other accoutrements to add to the feel of tonight's escapade. She considered that she could use the back room for it. That way she could go all out, and Mark wouldn't see it until the time came to unveil it. That room hadn't been decorated yet, and was still being stripped down, so it really didn't matter if a mess was made in there. It was like a blank canvas. She got some candles to put around the room, and continued to search for some other bits to make the room look the part. She was lost in imagining different ideas, moving from stall to stall, looking at all the unusual collections on offer that she might be able to use or adapt to her need. It was while she was captivated in this search that she made her turn into the unexpected. She wasn't sure at what point she had wandered down the little side avenue, but she first became aware of her unfamiliar surroundings when she realized that the majority of the market's bustling sounds and street noise had fallen away. It was a lot quieter here, insulated, tucked away with very few people around. In fact, the only people she saw were the peering faces of some of the stallholders. Aside from that, she was very much alone. She was in a small market square that she had never seen before, and she wondered if perhaps it might be a newly opened area. Stalls lined the square in rows, and a number of doors stood open in the walls of the square, leading into small shops. The dimensions of the entire area seemed a bit odd somehow. The walls surrounding the square were exceptionally high, and unlike any others in the stables. They were also made of a dark brick, the likes of which she had not seen anywhere else. However, the brickwork did not look new. In fact, it looked very old and worn. The same was true of the cobblestones beneath her. Clearly, this had not been newly constructed as she first thought, but she considered perhaps that it was an older area that had been newly opened to join the market for the first time. Yet, somehow, that didn't seem entirely right either. Could it really be that she had just missed this place all the times that she had been here? If so, it would seem that she wasn't the only one, and she wondered how the traders of the square could possibly stay in business with so little foot traffic coming by. Regardless of how strange it seemed, Tina was not put off. The idea of finding an unexplored area of Camden was thrilling to her, and she immediately loved the idea that this place could perhaps be a hidden treasure. So, with a smile, she walked further into the market square to have a look around. For the most part, it appeared to be like a small flea market, selling all sorts of bric-a-brac. Assorted brass cups, old swords, antique muskets and pistols, deer antlers, small reproductions of classical statues, taxidermied animals, and one stall had some very creepy paintings. As she was browsing, one of the doors off to the side caught her attention. It was dim inside, but she could see shelves lined with books. Tina loved a good bookshop, and didn't waste any time before venturing inside. It was a small, poky shop, but the shelves reached high, with a ladder leaning against them to allow access to the higher books. But she didn't look at the volumes immediately. Instead she stood, wistfully, just inside the doorway, breathing in the glorious smell of all the old books. Nowhere but a bookshop had this captivating scent. an eminent bouquet of age and knowledge. Elated by the feel and smell of the place, she began to look through the books. Save for a few editions like the Romance of King Arthur and the Odyssey, she did not recognize any of the publications on offer. Leafing through one, she saw that it was written in Latin, and so returned it to the shelf, wondering if perhaps it was a specialty bookstore for foreign languages. But as she continued to trace her finger along the spines of the many volumes, she realized that while the books were not all foreign, many of them were definitely special. Some appeared to be handwritten diaries from ages past, while others were first editions of the strangest type. Moltard's Vision in the Sky, Parel's Discourse in Death, and E. A. Holland's A Discovery of Fairy. Enticingly obscure tomes, the likes of which she had seen nowhere else. They were bizarre and occult, speaking of things she had never heard of. Was all this fiction, or the works of some old thaumaturge revealing his eldritch secrets? Suddenly, aware of her own ignorance, she became self-conscious that maybe her confusion was visible. She looked around and saw only an old, bespectacled man seated behind the shop counter. He was watching her, though he did not seem judgmental, and gave her a small nod and just asked, "Do you need any help finding anything?" Tina shook her head. "No thanks, I'm just looking." "Well, I'm sure you'll find what you want," the old man replied. "I have something for everyone." Tina smiled and turned back to the bookshelves, stepping away around a corner. Somehow she felt better being able to browse where the old man couldn't see. As she returned to browsing the volumes before her, her eyes fell upon a leather-bound book which appeared to have no title. She picked it up and opened it to the first page. No author, no title, but it was clearly old, and as she turned the pages, the book released a smoky aroma which had been trapped inside. It was not unlike the smell of a bonfire, and made her feel somehow warm and comfortable. Leafing through the book, she could see that it was handwritten, or, more specifically, it appeared to have been scribed with some kind of fine brush, giving every word a delicate, calligraphic beauty. It was in English, and accompanied by a number of detailed diagrams, instructions for how to enact a variety of rites and procedures of arcane intent. It was a spell book, some old grimoire, handcrafted by some forgotten magician. Tina's mind whirled with the wonder of it. It was fantastic, and would make quite the conversation piece, or even a decoration for their next Halloween party. Then it occurred to her, she could use this tonight. Her sexy witch routine would be incredible if it actually had some kind of authentic touch. Then afterwards, she could give the book to Mark as a gift. He'd love it. Without another thought, she took the book to the counter and handed it to the old man. "This one?" he asked. "Yes, please," Tina nodded. The man stood holding the book, stood for perhaps just a fraction too long before turning away from Tina and reaching down to the ground for a small money bag. A chill ran down Tina's spine. She was a bit creeped out by the lingering gaze of the shopkeeper. "How much is it?" she asked. £4, the old man replied. "Everything is £4. That seemed like a great price, and Tina quickly got £4 coins from her purse, dropping them into the old man's hand. He deposited them into his money bag and handed the book across the counter to her. She reached out to take the book, though as she grasped it, the old man kept his grip on the leather tome. Tina looked him in the eye, wondering if he was going to let go. "See," he said, "I've got something for everyone." She started to pull the book toward her, and he finally let go, keeping his eyes fixed upon her. "Yes," she replied quickly, sliding the book into her bag. "I guess you do. Thank you." With that, she quickly made her way back to the door, not liking the feeling she was getting from the strange old man. As she left, She thought that he said something else to her, though she didn't stop to listen. She just continued swiftly into the small square and toward the alley that had led her in. As she walked, there was a rumble from above, and the heavens suddenly opened into a heavy downpour. Quickly, she ran to take shelter from the rain, not caring much about where, so long as it was dry. In no time, she'd slipped through the market stalls of the stable and ducked into a cafe to wait out the rain. The torrential storm delayed her journey home, but it did give her a chance to have a better look through the book. There was all sorts of wonderful and weird things in it. Charms, curses, summoning spells. And then she found something that really caught her eye for tonight's intended seduction. A spell to bond two spirits together. That sounded perfect. A real act of love. Something to represent the two of them coming together and staying together forever. So, before long, she was preparing the scene of this perfect spell. A circle on the floor. Candles. A design drawn within the circle, just like the book instructed. It looked incredible. She even drew some of the shapes and designs on the wall for extra effect. After all, it didn't have to be exactly like the book, it just needed to look the part. Before long, her occult wonder was complete. Just the final touch, a chair in the middle from where he could enjoy the show. She was proud of what she had put together and made sure to close the door of the back room to make sure that the surprise remained hidden. She'd sneak in later, after dinner, and light the candles. For now, it was ready to go, and she had to get the rest of the evening's treats ready before Mark got home from work. With the oven heated, she prepared dinner. Lamb, sprinkled with fresh-cut rosemary and tender baby potatoes. She could leave that cooking while she showered, reapplied her makeup, slid into her sexy new underwear, and got changed into her new dress. Then high heels, just to add that final element of desire. She wanted him to be drooling over her, even before anything else happened. Tina looked at herself in the mirror. She looked delicious, and she felt empowered by the sense of her own desirability. He'd be putty in her hands. The rattling clunk of keys in the front door alerted her that Mark was finally home. She wanted to meet him and see the look on his face when he saw her in her new outfit. The intention was to give him a first reveal with a sultry descent of the stairs, all slow and sexy. But that wasn't exactly what happened. The first few steps she was all high heels and legs, but once she saw him, she couldn't help herself. She was always the same when he got home. The excitement for kisses and cuddles was too much. So, her enticing descent quickly turned into a series of short skips and jumps down the stairs, then quick leaping bounces over to him like some kind of playful puppy. By now he knew to expect it, though the sight of her all dressed up as she was did make him stop in his tracks, eyes wide and heartbeat increased. In fact, it distracted him to the point that even knowing what was about to happen, he still wasn't fully prepared for her final pounce into his arms. And he staggered back a couple of steps, his arms wrapped around her waist in equal degrees of affection and balance. With joyful exuberance, she peppered his face with little kisses, leaving smooches of lipstick all over him. Mark laughed, his spirits immediately lifted from the drudgery of a long week of work, and he finally managed to return some of the kisses on her. Eventually, he pulled back to get a proper look at her. "Well, what's all this?" he asked, looking her up and down hungrily. "Oh, just a little something I picked up today," she replied, beaming a smile at him. "And what's the occasion?" "Oh," she said, biting her bottom lip, "I thought I'd give you a little treat. This is just part of it." "A treat? It's not even my birthday." "No, but you've been working so hard on the new house, and going to work too. I just want to show you how much I appreciate it while I'm looking for a new job." "You didn't have to do that, baby," he said, butting his head gently against hers. "I wanted to," she replied with a quick kiss on his lips. But like I said, there's more. She began to pull off his coat and hang it up. I'm cooking your favourite, and it will be done soon. So you just chill down here for a bit while I go and run you a nice bath. I can just grab a shower, he said, squeezing her bum gleefully. You know I'm not really one for the whole bubble bath and candles thing. Okay then, Tina agreed. You do that, and afterwards you can relax for a bit while I finish up cooking. I love you, baby, he told her, giving her a squeeze. You're so good to me. I'll be even better to you later, she replied, biting her bottom lip again and sliding away to the kitchen. He watched her walk away, enjoying every moment of her seductive sway before heading upstairs for his shower, looking forward to the unexpected evening ahead. Music, wine, laughter, and an amazing home-cooked meal. This was definitely a special surprise, and something that they both enjoyed. But the core of that enjoyment was in being together, having the chance to just sit, look into each other's eyes, talking and smiling, sharing thoughts and feelings about everything, from the insignificant minutiae of life to the deep, unanswered questions of the universe. Of course, even in their wildest dreams, neither of them could have suspected how strange and bizarre the universe really is. What fantastic terrors dwelled beyond the common perceptions of humanity. But they'd soon come to discover that uncanny reality. When they had finished both the meal and the wine, Tina began to move the plates to the kitchen. Mark came in behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. I'll do the washing up, he offered, affectionately kissing her shoulder. Don't worry about that, Tina replied, turning to face him. We'll worry about that in the morning. Right now, I have another treat for you. Mark smiled at the suggestive nature of Tina's tone, knowing that she was in the mood to move the evening into the bedroom. But as she led him upstairs by the hand, he was confused when she turned away from the bedroom and toward the spare room. Where are we going? He asked. Wait and see, she told him, stopping at the door of the spare room. You wait here for just a moment and close your eyes. Mark did as he was told, wondering what little game she was up to, but still very much looking forward to finding out. Tina could be incredibly imaginative, and Mark knew that there was no point in even trying to guess what she had in store. She was many things, but predictable was not one of them. After a moment, Tina returned and took him by the hand, leading him slowly forward into the back room. He kept his eyes closed, but could feel that the room was warmer than the rest of the house, and there was a faint smell in the air, like some kind of perfume or incense. She guided him into the chair at the center of the room, and then moved around behind him. Music began to play, and she moved in close, leaning down and whispering into his ear. You can open your eyes now. As he lifted his eyelids, his pupils quickly adjusted to the low light of dozens of candles surrounding him in a circle, and he looked down to see a star design detailed onto the floor underneath him. More symbols lined the walls, and to one side he could see an antique book resting open on a small table. He smiled at the occult decor, though was still unsure of what the game was meant to be. But before he had an opportunity to speak, Tina's sultry form moved around him and began to dance. It was a tease of erotic fantasy, each movement a promise of sensual passion yet to be realized, a seduction in motion, the rhythmic sway of her hips in time with the music giving form to lust, a body of need embraced in waves of heat and desire. His eyes caressing her sultry curves, his breathing deep and heavy. Each look, each gaze of her eyes shined with the candle flames, transmitting their sexual want. Her body was weaving magic, a witchcraft of desire. Her lips spoke the words she had committed to memory, whispering their incantation with shallow, breathy voice. She was his mistress of sorceries, and her power was the ecstasy of longing, the aphrodisia of the body. Sex, magic, lust, passion, love, darkness. She finally took him into her in a unity of carnal pleasure, a joining of flesh and spirit. The spell be done, and never undone. Needless to say, Mark liked his surprise. He loved Tina, and it was all perfect. He even thought that they should make the back room look that way for one of their parties. But the spell book, now that was something extra special. He could tell that it was one of a kind and must be very old. It would be a wonderful addition to the house. There in the living room, surrounded by his horror movies and Stephen King novels. He was tempted to even build a special display case for it, but anything like that would have to wait. For now, there was a lot of other work that needed doing around the house, and that would have to take priority. While Mark spent the weekend on those tasks, Tina continued her job hunt, scouring the internet for something suitable. But the evenings were theirs to spend together, winding down, cuddled up on the couch with the television and a takeaway. Come the next week, it was business as usual. Mark kissed Tina goodbye and headed off to work. Every minute that they were apart, they missed each other, and couldn't help but count down until they would see each other again. Tina had always tended to be like that. She had a sentimental streak a mile wide. Mark, however, was more the type to do all that he could to keep himself busy so that the time would go faster. But after the past weekend, things felt different. He had always looked forward to coming home to Tina, but now it felt like an ache inside him when they were apart. He no longer just looked forward to seeing her again, he longed for her. Each moment without her was restless and drawn out. She was his heaven and earth, and being without her began to feel like he was tumbling in a void. Tina felt much the same, though with less to distract her. She cleaned the house, went shopping, and generally tried to be productive. But there was that longing. Thankfully, come mid-afternoon, she was given something more to focus on. One of the jobs she had applied for telephoned her, asking if she'd be free to come in for an interview later that day. She leapt at the chance. She'd had enough of being at home, not just today, but for the last few weeks. She needed to get back to work, the sooner the better. So, she agreed to the interview time, even though it was so soon. It meant having to rush around to get dressed up into suitable interview attire, and then try to work out the fastest route via public transport to get there. But she managed to make it, and with 10 minutes to spare. That gave her just enough time to freshen up, straighten her outfit, and text Mark to let him know what was going on. Then she was ready to tackle whatever was thrown at her. Going in, her confidence was like a spotlight, making her stand out. She knew she could do the job. She had more than enough experience, skill, and qualifications. She reckoned that she just had to win over the interviewer. Speaking to him, that didn't seem like it was going to be a problem. The interviewer was a lovely person and was clearly very impressed by Tina. He even went so far as to tell her that she was the best applicant they'd seen that far. Unofficially, she was a shoo-in. But of course, she'd have to wait for all the interviews to be completed before they could tell her officially. With that good news, Tina felt light as a feather, and she made her way home. Maintaining that kind of airy positivity is not easy when travelling on the London Underground, but for her, there was no challenge. Everything was coming together. Things were amazing at home, and now it looked like she had a new job. The light of life was shining down upon her. However, while life may want nothing but the best, it is nonetheless often harsh and brutal. Further, fate is also prone to having a rather wicked sense of humour, and rarely likes us to feel too comfortable. It was late by the time Tina got home. Walking in the door and seeing his coat and shoes, she knew that Mark was already home. He most likely would have been in for a couple of hours already. As she kicked off her shoes and made her way through the house, she called out to him, but there was no reply. From above, she could hear a soft whir and realized that he must be on the top floor doing some DIY. By the sound of it, he was sanding down the beams up there with the electric sander. She was tired and drained from the churning mix of London travel, so was hardly in the mood to cook dinner, but she thought that she had better see how Mark felt, and whether or not he had already eaten. Making her way up the stairs, she called out to him again, but he clearly couldn't hear her over the noise of the appliance. Not that it mattered. She was determined to go up and see him regardless. His face was the perfect salve to the woes of a long day, especially if it was all sweaty and covered in grime, with his hair all messy from doing his home improvements. It was mucky, but cute. Opening the door to the room, the scene inside was far from refreshing. Tina's world slowed to a crawl as she saw the body lying on the floor at the bottom of a stepladder. He must have fallen, hit his head. But more than that, in the wake of the fall, the electric sander had also fallen, and under its own power had been propelled into Mark's face, where it currently sat, whirring and grinding against his skin. The amount of blood was surprisingly small, though he had been laying there for long enough that it had formed a pool around his head, a puddled red halo highlighting the awful yet obvious truth. Mark was dead. She didn't want to accept it, wouldn't accept it. He was hurt, not dead. He'd be okay. She ran to his side, tossing away the sander and shaking him, trying to get him to wake up, speaking and then screaming his name. But no matter what she did, no matter how passionately she willed it, he wouldn't awaken. He was already gone, taken by death's icy grip. Medics and police arrived. She supposed that she must have called them, though, looking back on it, she couldn't really remember doing so. In fact, much of that night became a blur, a trance-like daze that extended across the hours, and then began to leak into the following days. Those days were numb and distant. Surrounded by friends and family, she was rarely alone, yet was barely aware of their presence. At best, they were a distraction, a collection of voices and shadows projecting their grief and sympathies to her. Strangely, it was only when they were gone that she began to feel that she was not alone. They had only been taking her attention away from the familiar presence in the back of her mind. She didn't want to believe that Mark was gone, and in those quiet moments, it felt as though he wasn't. As if he was still right there, out of sight, but ever present. She could imagine how he was just in the next room, or not even home from work. A ghost of him, deceptively ordinary, and lacking that cruel sting of death. Even the funeral did nothing to lessen this sensation of his presence. He felt numinous and always about her, and each night she would cry herself to exhaustion before finally surrendering to the feeling that he was still with her. She was haunted by him, though she neither saw nor heard him. He was gone, but she clung to the phantom of his being, sensing that they were still together, that they could not truly be parted. A fragile wish that their love could be stronger than death. Or was it perhaps more than that? Could it possibly be that these feelings, this sense of presence and connection, was something other than wishful thinking and the terrible pangs of a mourning heart? Could it be that in some strange and spectral way he really wasn't gone? She tried to rescue her mind from these thoughts. She tried to abandon them and ignore the feelings. Tina knew that she could not allow herself to get dragged down into fantasy and illusion. She had to try and accept Mark's death. That was the only way that she could ever hope to move on and find life beyond this tragedy. So, though it pained her like a needle in the heart, she began to turn away from those ideas and feelings. Whenever her mind began to wander into those familiar patterns of expecting him to be there, she would remind herself that he wasn't, that he never would be again, that he was gone. Bit by bit, in the days following the funeral, she became better at facing that reality, until finally, one night, she slept without tears. But it was on that night, when she had finally surrendered him to the abyss, that the abyss reached out with a love that was unwilling to go quietly into oblivion. The rain thrashed hard on the windows, and the distant sound of sirens was the only other noise that could be heard from the world outside. Laying in bed, opening herself to the acceptance of her loss, Tina found that she couldn't cry. This, in itself, made her sad because she feared that she may have no more tears to shed for her loss. In this, the sound of the rain became doubly soothing. The waves of its white noise created a relaxing background tone, while also providing a kind of natural replacement for her own tears, as though the world would weep where she could not. While the sound of the city were hidden by the downpour, other, closer sounds seemed more prominent. Each creak and crack of the settling of the house felt more pronounced. She had become used to those sounds and could even anticipate them as they went through their nightly chorus. It was a familiarity that made her all the more aware of the single noise that did not fit the routine of the house. It was a single creak, probably from the stairs, which stood out to her. The unexpected sound roused her from her relaxed state, and she lay there, listening, trying to discern if she had, in fact, heard what she thought she had. Minutes passed, without anything else, and she began to convince herself that it was nothing, slipping again into that relaxation on the path to sleep. But then the disturbance returned, though it was different this time. Closer. Another creak of the floor, followed by a slight shuffle, this time in the corridor, just down from the bedroom. It sounded like a footstep, like definite movement. And she lay still and alert, her eyes wide and staring into the darkness. She was laying with her back to the bedroom door, but was too scared to roll over, as she thought that anyone approaching would surely hear the movement of the bed. But as the handle clicked and the door creaked open, she knew that she was definitely not alone. But still, she was in the grip of fear, and found herself presently unable to do anything. There was no further sound. Nothing but the rain and her own heavy breathing. Whoever it was had not moved. Or if they had, they were inhumanly silent. So were they just watching her from the doorway? Had they left? Or had she imagined it, and there had never been anyone there in the first place? A maelstrom of fear, curiosity, and confusion began to build inside of her. It stirred and twisted, creating a powerful need to move, an absolute necessity to turn and look at the doorway. So, with her heart pounding and her breath heavy, she allowed herself to look. She twisted her neck and then her shoulder, rolling slowly onto her back and gazing behind her. She saw it. It was there, in the doorway, unmoving, unflinching, and having no care that she could now see it. A figure. No, a familiar figure, looming out of the shadows now and into sight, his face torn and shredded from the tragedy that had killed him. He was here, and he stepped closer and closer, reaching out to her, his eyes filled with the unnatural glow of whatever terrible power had wrenched him from the grave. But for all the horror of this sight, she was crippled by her terror. She tried to scream, but it became locked in her throat. Still he came to her, reaching for her. They were one. They were joined, two souls entwined by love and darkness. So he could not leave her. He had come for her, and his vice-like grip held firm onto her wrist as he dragged her from the bed and pulled her away into the night. They had promised eternity to each other, and eternity would be their sentence. What is done cannot be undone, and what the source has joined, no man may sunder. For the twisted power of vile sorceries are greater still than death itself, so that in the grip of such dark wonders, even death may become a servant to the heart. But let this be a warning to those who may be foolish enough to vainly seek the blessings of darkness. Her ways are mysterious, and not meant for thee, for she is the mother of beauty, and the mistress of all horrors.